He wasn't born a monster, but the streets of Brooklyn turned him into one. Before he was the Mafia's most feared executioner, before cops secretly worked for him, Anthony Gaspipe, Casso was just a kid who learned one deadly lesson. Fear opens doors, and violence keeps them open. This is the true story of the man who didn't just rule the underworld. He rewrote the meaning of terror. South Brooklyn in the 1940s was not a place where innocence survived for long. The air always smelled like bread, diesel, and saltwater, a strange blend of comfort and danger. The clatter of the docks never stopped, and the streets were alive with the coded rhythms of a neighborhood ruled by two forces: poverty and the men who profited from it. This was the world that welcomed Anthony Salvatore Casso on May 21, 1942. He wasn't born into crime, but he was born close enough to breathe it in. His father, Michael, worked long, brutal hours as a longshoreman. His mother, Margaret, stitched dresses late into the night to keep the lights on. They were immigrants trying to survive the American dream one slow, hard day at a time. But in South Brooklyn, the dream had rules, unspoken ones, and young Anthony grew up hearing them whispered from stoops, alleys, and corner clubs where smoke curled like secrets. Respect is earned. Fear is power. And the law? That's for other neighborhoods. To a boy like Anthony, these weren't warnings. They were lessons. By age 8, Anthony understood something most grown men never fully grasped. Violence wasn't the last option. It was the first one that worked. He was bigger than most kids his age, thick-shouldered and heavy-handed. But it wasn't just size that set him apart. It was temperament. Teachers said he had a temper. Kids in the street had another word for it: dangerous. If another kid had a better toy, Anthony took it. If someone cut him in line, he shoved them to the ground. If someone complained, he hit harder. Parents told their children to avoid him. Shopkeepers kept one eye on the door whenever he walked in. Even adults felt something uneasy coil in their stomachs when they saw the boy with a dark stare and clenched jaw. He wasn't wild. He wasn't emotional. He was controlled, even at that age, calm in a way that made violence look like instinct. South Brooklyn lived on two levels. On the surface, it was a working-class haven: Italian bakeries, kids playing stickball, mothers gossiping through apartment windows. But beneath that veneer pulsed a darker reality. The docks weren't just a workplace. They were a cash register for organized crime. Trucks arrived when the mob allowed them. Unions moved how the mob commanded. Entire blocks lived under rules written in whispers. Anthony didn't learn this from books. He learned it from watching. Outside the social clubs on 13th Avenue, men in tailored suits slipped in and out like priests of an unholy church. They never looked rushed, never looked worried. They were respected, feared, untouchable. Their shoes polished, their cars immaculate. They were everything his father wasn't. And young Anthony, who sat on the stoop pretending to play with a ball while eavesdropping, absorbed every gesture, every nod, every quiet word. He didn't see criminals. He saw a path. Anthony's story could have gone differently, if not for the night that stripped away whatever innocence he had left. He was 14. It started with candy. It ended with near murder. Gino's Market was a tiny corner shop run by an elderly man named Salvatore Benedetto. The kids stole from him all the time: candy, soda, whatever they could pocket. But when Benedetto caught Anthony and his friends one afternoon and called him a thief in front of everyone, something in the boy snapped. It wasn't about the candy. It was about pride, respect, the kind of small humiliation that someone like Anthony simply could not endure. That night, long after the sun dipped behind the brick tenements, Anthony stood in the narrow alley behind the store. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't excited. He was focused, unblinking, steady. When Benedetto closed his shop and stepped toward his car, Anthony moved from the shadows with a baseball bat gripped in both hands. No words. No hesitation. The first swing shattered the old man's shoulder. The second broke ribs. The third was aimed at his head. Only the distant echo of footsteps saved Benedetto's life. Anthony fled, disappearing into the maze of Brooklyn's night streets. No one ever identified the attacker. No one ever dared to. In that moment, Anthony learned a truth that would shape the rest of his life. Violence wasn't just power, it was freedom. After that night, it was as if something inside Anthony had awakened. A hunger, a certainty. He was no longer a boy trying to survive the streets. He was a boy who dominated them. Kids avoided him. Teenagers stepped out of his way. Small-time hustlers nodded respectfully as he passed. And the men in suits? They began to notice him. To them, he wasn't just another street kid with a temper. He was raw talent, unshaped, unpolished, but burning with potential. The kind of potential that could earn. The kind of potential that could kill. By 16, Anthony had dropped out of school. By 17, he was working for bookmakers and loan sharks. By 18, he was feared. The transformation was complete. The streets had done their job well. He wasn't raised to be a criminal. He was shaped into one. Carved by poverty. Sharpened by anger. Polished by the silent approval of dangerous men. The boy who once threw punches over candy was now being groomed for something far darker. A life where fear was currency and blood was the price of doing business. This is where the legend of Anthony Gaspipe Casso truly begins. Not in the Mafia halls or FBI files or courtroom transcripts, but in the shadows of South Brooklyn, where a boy discovered that violence could open doors no honest life ever would. A boy who learned too early and too well that the world made way for the one unafraid to break it. Welcome my beautiful family and friends to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. Now back to the story. Anthony Casso didn't enter the Mafia the way most young men did. He didn't beg for a chance. He didn't run errands for months to prove loyalty. He didn't carry coffee cups for soldiers, hoping one day to be noticed. He was noticed long before he even understood how dangerous that was. The Lucchese leadership saw something in him, something rare, something raw, something useful.
Not charm.
Not loyalty. Not ambition. They saw violence. Pure, instinctive, unfiltered violence. The kind that couldn't be taught. The kind that couldn't be controlled. The kind that, if pointed in the right direction, could reshape entire criminal empires. They didn't recruit Anthony Casso. They aimed him. His entry into the Lucchese world began inside a dim social club on 18th Avenue. Red leather booths. A haze of cigarette smoke hanging like a low cloud. Men with eyes that had seen too much, speaking in whispers, as if the walls themselves might be informants. Christy Fornari and Vincent Alloy, two men who earned their reputations the hard way, watched him carefully. Not with warmth. Not with welcome. With calculation. They didn't ask about his past. They didn't care about the candy store beating, the street fights, the small-time rackets. They were interested in only one thing. Can the kid do what needs to be done? And Anthony answered without speaking. It was in the way he sat, still, alert, leaning forward slightly like a predator waiting for permission to strike. It was in his eyes, flat, cold, unblinking. The Luccheses saw the monster forming long before he did. Christy Fornari didn't believe in half measures. If you were going to be a killer, you needed to be a perfect killer. From him, Anthony learned the logic behind the violence. How to track a man for days without being noticed, where to stand so the bullet would look like it came from somewhere else, why timing mattered more than accuracy, how to read fear and weaponize it. Fornari taught with a surgeon's precision, breaking down each kill like a professor dissecting a frog. Vincent Alloy taught something different. Something darker. He taught punishment. Alloy believed pain had a purpose, sometimes a message, sometimes a warning, sometimes a cleansing fire that burned betrayal out of a man's soul. From him, Anthony learned where to apply pressure to silence a scream, how to break a bone without splintering skin, of which tools left no trace, and how fear could make even the strongest man spill secrets like water. Alloy didn't just shape Anthony's skills. He shaped his philosophy. If Fornari sharpened the blade, Alloy forged it. It didn't take long before the family began giving Anthony work. Not tests. Not small threats. Real work. Work that required steady nerves, cold resolve, and absolute obedience. At first, it was simple collection jobs, breaking a hand here, smashing a storefront window there. A warning, a reminder, a taste of what the Luccheses would do if debts weren't paid. Anthony excelled. Where most young recruits hesitated, he stepped forward. Where others flinched, he tightened his grip. Where some needed guidance, Anthony moved with an almost instinctive brutality. Word traveled fast. The kid's different. He doesn't blink. He enjoys it. The whispers reached Fernari. They reached Alloy. And soon, they reached someone else, the man who handled special problems. It was a cold night when Anthony was finally given the job that would change everything. A rival low-level bookmaker had crossed the wrong man, the wrong time, the wrong family. He had to go. Nothing dramatic. Nothing messy. Just business. Christy Fernari said one sentence that would echo in Anthony's life forever. Make it quick, and make sure he knows why. Anthony found the target outside a bar, fumbling for his keys. No screaming. No desperate chase. One shot. Precise. Close enough for the victim to see the killer's face. Cold enough that he didn't dare speak Anthony's name with his last breath. Clean. Efficient. Flawless. Exactly what the Luccheses wanted. The second was different. More intimate. More personal. More brutal. This time the target had betrayed a friend of the family, stolen money, lied, tried to run. He made it as far as New Jersey. Anthony drove out alone. He didn't knock on the motel door. He kicked it in. The gunshot was louder this time. The cleanup messier. The emotion colder. When he returned to Brooklyn, Alloy asked only one thing. Did you pause? Anthony shook his head. Alloy smiled. A small, quiet, knowing smile. You're ready. In the Mafia, names are earned. Some are given in jest. Some in anger. Some in respect. Anthony's name came from fear. He didn't run fuel rackets, at least not yet. He didn't blow up pipelines or torch trucks. But he brought a different kind of suffocation. A quiet, creeping, inevitable pressure that wrapped around you until escape became impossible. He killed without hesitation. He punished without emotion. He followed orders with machine-like precision. Men began referring to him with a shiver. Gaspipe. Not because of any business he ran, but because once he was sent after you, you felt the air leaving your lungs long before he even arrived. By his early 20s, Anthony Casso was no longer a street kid, no longer an errand boy, no longer a hopeful recruit. He was a weapon. The Lucchese family didn't guide him. They didn't mentor him. They didn't shape him. They unleashed him. And the city would never be the same. By the early 1980s, Anthony Gaspipe Casso had already earned a reputation as one of the most dangerous men in New York. But violence was only the beginning of his talent. Behind the brutality lived something even more dangerous, a brilliant criminal mind. Gaspipe wasn't content with being a killer. He wanted control. He wanted money. He wanted a kingdom. One carved beneath the city, where sunlight never reached. And so he began to build it. Not with concrete. Not with blueprints. But with corruption, fear, and the kind of financial schemes that only a twisted genius could imagine. New York in the 70s and 80s was booming. Glass towers rising, unions thriving, gasoline flowing, trucks roaring across bridges and tunnels. It looked like progress. But beneath the steel and neon lights, there were shadows, a parallel city the public never saw. And that was where Gaspipe flourished. He understood something most mobsters didn't. Violence creates fear, but money creates power. Real power. Invisible power. Casso didn't want to shake down a few stores or skim coins off jukeboxes. He wanted the arteries of the city, the supply lines, the unions, the trucks, the contracts. The bigger the vein, the more blood it carried. And once he had a taste, he wanted everything. It began with gasoline. Taxes on fuel in New York were high, and most businessmen paid them without question. But Gaspipe saw an opportunity. He didn't want a piece of the gasoline market, he wanted to rewrite the rules of the market itself. The daisy chain was simple in theory, brilliant in execution, and devastating for the government. Shell companies were set up, fake distributors, fake wholesalers, fake employees, fake records. Gasoline moved from company to company, each one disappearing before the IRS could collect the taxes owed. By the time authorities realized what was happening, the Lucchese family had already pocketed tens of millions. And Gaspipe? He became the architect of one of the biggest tax fraud schemes in American history. It wasn't just theft, it was engineering. Crime woven like circuitry. And the money that flowed in didn't just make him rich, it made him powerful. Once the fuel money started rolling in, Gaspipe expanded into unions, the lifeblood of the city's workforce. The garment union, the carpenters, the laborers, the teamsters. If men were moving goods, lifting steel, pouring concrete, or driving a truck, Casso wanted a hand in their pocket. But he didn't simply threaten them. He bought them. Union bosses received envelopes stuffed with cash. Delegates were flown to Vegas for meetings that conveniently involved gambling and women. Contracts were awarded based not on skill, but on obedience. If a contractor wanted a job, they paid. If a worker wanted to stay employed, they obeyed. If a developer didn't want their building burned to the ground, they listened. Casso now controlled not just people, but industries. And that was only the beginning. New York didn't rise from the bedrock on hopes and dreams. It rose on deals, payoffs, kickbacks, and bribery. Gaspipe made sure of that. Every building that rose into the sky had hands reaching into its budget. Cement contracts, delivery schedules, safety inspections, subcontractors, material suppliers. Nothing happened unless Casso approved it. Developers who cooperated got their steel delivered on time. Those who didn't watch trucks mysteriously get stuck for days, or had materials lost, or suffered accidents. Some even had their sites vandalized, or worse. Gaspipe didn't just skim money from construction. He controlled the rhythm of the entire industry. Skyscrapers rose. Fortunes were made. And beneath it all, Casso's empire spread like roots through concrete. While the construction money flowed steadily, the narcotics trade was a wild river of cash and risk. Many mobsters avoided it because prison sentences were long and the streets were unpredictable. Gaspipe wasn't afraid of risk. He partnered with traffickers. He cut deals with crews in Brooklyn, Manhattan, New Jersey.
Heroin, cocaine, pills.
Whatever turned a profit. But unlike other bosses, he didn't touch the product. He didn't sell it. He didn't transport it. He engineered the network. Every drug deal in certain neighborhoods sent a ripple of money upward to him. He didn't have to get his hands dirty. Others dirted them for him. And if they got greedy, Gaspipe took care of that personally. No mafia empire is complete without the classics. Bookmaking operations ran around the clock. Sports bets. Numbers games. High-stakes poker rooms in basements and back rooms. And extortion, always extortion, was the oxygen of the mafia. Store owners, trucking companies, restaurants, nightclubs. Everyone paid. Everyone knew the rules. Everyone understood that a quiet business was a safe business. And Gaspipe made sure the message was never forgotten. While New Yorkers walked the crowded streets, shopping, commuting, living their daily lives, an invisible world pulsed beneath their feet. Every building that rose into the sky, every truck that crossed a bridge, every shipment unloaded on the docks, every union meeting, every fuel truck on the highway, every dice roll in a basement game, fed into Gaspipe Casso's machine. He built an empire without walls, without borders, without limits. A kingdom that lived in the shadows of the city's progress. Casso's empire was not loud. It was not flashy. It was silent. It was patient. It was poisonous. It fed on everything New York needed to survive, its labor, its industries, its movement, its money. He didn't carve out a small corner of the underworld. He built a parallel economy, running alongside the city's legitimate one like a dark twin. And the more he expanded, the more dangerous he became, not because he killed, but because he expanded without fear. Gaspipe wasn't satisfied with being a powerful mobster. He wanted to be inevitable. And for a time he was. He had created an empire not built on stone, but on greed, ambition, and the kind of genius that thrives only in darkness. There are lines in organized crime so sacred, so absolute, that even the most ruthless mobsters refuse to cross them. A killer can betray a friend. A boss can betray a family. A soldier can betray his oath. But there is one betrayal that even the Mafia sees as blasphemy. Buying the law. Not bribing it. Not persuading it. Not dancing around it. Owning it. Owning the badge. Owning the gun. Owning the men sworn to protect the public. Anthony Gaspipe Casso didn't just cross that line, he erased it. Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa were not small-time cops. They were decorated NYPD detectives. Men with commendations. Men with respect. Men who had sworn to serve and protect. But beneath the uniforms lived something twisted, something broken.
Greed. Ego.
A hunger for more than their salaries and badges could offer. And Casso saw it. He had a talent for spotting darkness in men, a sixth sense for corruption. When Eppolito and Caracappa approached him, it was not with hesitation or fear. It was with a proposal, a partnership, a devil's alliance. Casso didn't need just information. Every mobster had a guy in the precinct, a cousin, a friend, someone who tipped them off now and then. But what these detectives offered was unprecedented. They offered access. They offered mob files. They offered addresses of informants. They offered tracking of rivals. They offered surveillance patterns, federal timelines, unmarked car routes. They offered the one thing the Mafia had dreamed of but never dared to reach for: full infiltration of law enforcement. And then they offered something darker. They offered murder for hire. Not sloppy hits. Not street executions. Not quick jobs done by jittery button men. Official, police-protected killings. Carried out with government resources. With a badge on the hip and the authority of the city behind the trigger. The first time Casso ordered them to kill, he expected hesitation. There was none. The detectives provided the target's location, movements, weak spots, and then they took care of the rest. The murder was efficient, silent, and looked nothing like Mafia work. It resembled a police operation gone wrong, a street confrontation, a tragic incident of bad luck. It was perfect. Casso realized what he had just unlocked. A new kind of power. Power without risk. Power without witnesses. Power without fear of arrest. Once the alliance solidified, the corruption evolved into something monstrous. Police cruisers, symbols of protection, became shields for the Mafia. Blue lights cleared traffic for hitmen. Police radios relayed the movement of targets. Detective cars escorted killers out of neighborhoods, never questioned, never stopped. If Casso wanted someone found, they were found. If he wanted someone tracked, they were tracked. If he wanted someone dead, they didn't see sunrise. New York had always feared mobsters. But now the city feared something worse. Mobsters with badges. Caracappa and Eppolito provided Casso with lists that no mob boss had ever seen before. Confidential informants. Witnesses under protection. Rivals cooperating with the government. Targets the FBI considered untouchable. They slid files across tables like menus. This one, or maybe this one. Casso chose. They performed. The partnership grew so efficient, so fluid, that Casso barely had to speak. Names were enough. A nod was enough. Sometimes just a look. The detectives understood exactly what was required. Word began to spread, but quietly, as if whispered by ghosts. People knew something was wrong. Something unnatural. Something that didn't fit the rules of the underworld or the rules of the law. Victims died in ways that made no sense. Informants vanished without a trace. Rivals were found before they could even switch sides. Federal targets were murdered while under surveillance. There were no leaks. No mistakes. No classic mob signatures. It was like the city had eyes in every alley. Like someone was watching every safe house. Like no secret was safe. Because none were. Casso had two of the most dangerous tools any criminal could possess: corrupted intelligence and legal immunity wrapped in uniforms. This wasn't fear creeping through the underworld. This was fear institutionalized. Not the kind of fear that comes from a gun pointed at your head. The deeper kind. The kind that comes from realizing the system itself has turned against you. No other mafia figure in American history, not Gotti, not Castellano, not Persico, not even the legendary bosses of Las Vegas or Chicago, ever achieved what Gaspipe achieved.
He didn't bribe the police.
He didn't manipulate them. He didn't threaten them. He owned them. They were his tools, his weapons, his shadows with guns and shields. Every time a blue and white cruiser rolled past a rival's house, it wasn't reassurance. It was a warning. Every time a badge flashed at a doorway, it didn't represent justice. It represented Casso. And in the underworld, where reputation means everything, this changed the landscape entirely. Men who had once feared Casso now feared him on a mythic level. How do you run from a mobster who has cops hunting for you? How do you hide when the police are giving him your location? How do you fight a man whose reach extends into the very institutions designed to protect you? You don't. You bow. You pay. You obey. Or you disappear. With Eppolito and Caracappa by his side, Casso didn't just have an advantage. He had dominion. He operated above the underworld, beyond the Mafia, outside the rules that governed both criminals and lawmen. He built a kingdom made of silence, secrecy, and state-sanctioned violence. A kingdom where justice was perverted, loyalty was expendable, and the badge, the sacred symbol of order, became a mask for murder. For the first time in American history, a mafia underboss held a power that should never have existed. The ability to kill with the full authority of the law behind him. Fear didn't follow Gaspipe Casso anymore. It wore a uniform. It sat in squad cars. It carried handcuffs and holsters. It spoke in police codes. It answered to him. And nothing in New York would ever be the same again. Power never satisfied Anthony, Gaspipe Casso. It only sharpened his hunger and deepened his fear. And with every dollar he earned, every murder he ordered, every badge he bought, paranoia slid deeper into his bones. He stopped seeing people. He started seeing threats. A whisper became a conspiracy. A glance became a betrayal. A delay became a death sentence. By the mid-1980s, Casso had climbed to the top of the Lucchese underworld, but the air up there was thin. Thin enough to twist your mind, thin enough to make you choke on the ghosts you created. And Casso had created many. The first signs of madness came quietly. He stopped trusting phone calls. Then he stopped trusting meetings. Then he stopped trusting drivers, friends, even longtime allies. He slept with a gun under his pillow and another beneath the mattress. He spoke less, watched more. He looked at every face twice, once as a friend, and again as a potential assassin. The irony was painful. The more he killed to protect himself, the more danger he believed he was in. He wasn't just fighting rivals anymore. He was fighting shadows. The FBI's pressure on New York's crime families was tightening. Informants, rats, in Mafia terms, were slowly eating away at the foundations of organized crime. The other families tried to handle it with strategy, patience, precision. Not Casso. He didn't investigate. He didn't interrogate. He didn't confirm. If someone whispered a name into his ear, even if it was a rumor, a grudge, a lie, Casso treated it as gospel. Informants were executed. Some quickly, others slowly. Some were shot in alleys. Some were tortured until they confessed, truthfully or not. To Casso, truth no longer mattered. Only punishment did. Every mob boss faces rivals. Casso eliminated them with mechanical efficiency. Men disappeared. Not arrested. Not warned. Not scared into hiding.
Gone.
A rival who challenged his control of a union?
Gone.
A loan shark who argued over interest?
Gone.
A soldier from another family who dared insult him at a club?
Gone.
Each disappearance sent ripples through the underworld. But instead of calming Casso's paranoia, the silence made him even more vigilant. Every kill fed his fear. Every fear demanded another kill. He had become a machine devouring its own fuel. The true mark of Casso's descent was when he turned on his own. A cousin accused of talking too much was beaten until he couldn't walk. A nephew suspected of skimming money was tortured for hours. A childhood friend who hesitated during a job was shot in both legs. And when someone asked, trembling, "Gaspipe, isn't he family?" Casso replied with something that chilled even hardened killers. "Family is whoever doesn't betray me today." Bloodlines meant nothing. History meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was loyalty, and loyalty was a word Casso no longer believed in. Paranoia has a way of widening its target. One night, Casso received word that a man named Anthony Bellini had spoken to agents. The real informant was Anthony Bellomo, another man entirely. Casso didn't wait to confirm. He didn't check. He didn't care. He sent men to kill Bellini, a completely innocent father of three who had no connection to Casso, no connection to the Mafia, no connection to crime at all. The hitmen broke into the wrong house. The wrong Anthony died.
Casso felt nothing.
No regret. No hesitation. Next time, he said, make sure you kill the right one. And that's when even his own men began to fear him, not because he was dangerous, but because he was unpredictable. The Mafia prides itself on being calm, controlled, disciplined in violence. But Casso was none of those things anymore. He was volatile, impulsive, unhinged. The other bosses saw it. His own captain saw it. Even the hitmen, men who lived and breathed killing, began avoiding him. When his name was mentioned in social clubs, men lowered their voices. When he walked into a meeting, conversations died mid-sentence. Behind his back, they used a word rarely spoken about a Mafia leader: uncontrollable. And there is no bigger insult in the underworld. Because an uncontrollable man is not feared. He is dangerous to everyone, including the people who rely on him. Every week brought new violence. A suspected informant strangled in a basement. A trucker set on fire for getting too curious about a fuel deal. A rival shot in broad daylight on a crowded Brooklyn street. A construction foreman beaten with hammers until even his own crew couldn't identify him. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't planned. It wasn't Mafia justice. It was slaughter. Pure, mindless slaughter. Casso ruled New York with the same logic as a wildfire. Indiscriminate, consuming anything in its path, unstoppable until nothing remained. With every death, Casso's world shrank. He stopped attending weddings. He stopped visiting restaurants. He stopped driving himself anywhere. He trusted no one. He checked behind curtains. He checked beneath cars. He ordered his men to taste his food. He wore bulletproof vests under his suits. The mobster who once strutted through Brooklyn now lived like a hunted animal. And the men who once supported him? They began to distance themselves. One by one. Not because they feared the law, but because they feared him. Gaspipe Casso was no longer a boss. He was a force of nature. Unpredictable. Uncontrollable. Unreasoning. He wasn't a man who made decisions. He was a storm that made victims. Lightning-fast violence. Thunderous anger. Wind that carried whispers of doom. A storm doesn't choose its targets. A storm doesn't negotiate. A storm doesn't explain. It destroys. Blindly. Absolutely. And that was Casso at the height of his reign, a storm tearing through the underworld, drowning New York in fear, devouring enemies and allies alike, leaving behind only bodies, silence, and the faint, choking smell of blood. For years, Anthony Gaspipe, Casso walked through New York like a man wrapped in armor no one else could see, a shield of fear, violence, and corruption so thick that even the boldest mobsters stepped aside when he approached. He believed he was untouchable. He believed he was inevitable. He believed he was beyond the reach of both the law and the underworld. But the thing about empires built in darkness is that they crumble fastest when the light finally finds them. And the FBI brought the sun. It didn't happen overnight. It was slow, grinding, suffocating, like a noose tightening one knot at a time. Informants began talking. Rivals began cooperating. Casso's own men, terrified of his paranoia, started slipping away, disappearing, or turning themselves in before he could reach them first. The FBI had studied him for years. They had pieced his empire together, brick by bloody brick, following the trail of bodies, bribes, and bullet casings that stretched across the city. They knew his tricks. They knew his safe houses. They knew the pattern of his paranoia. And when the moment came, they struck cleanly. No explosions. No dramatic chase. Just cold, procedural inevitability. The storm he had unleashed on New York finally met a force it couldn't intimidate. When agents finally took him into custody, he wasn't the raging monster people imagined. He was quiet.
Still. Watching.
The cuffs clicked.
The doors slammed.
And every echo sounded like the closing of a chapter he had spent decades writing in blood. For a man who believed fear was power, the ultimate irony was this. Nobody feared him anymore. Not with a badge behind their shoulder. Not with a prison door between them. Not with the federal government ready to bury him deeper than any grave he ever filled. They sent him to ADX Florence, the place where the country locks away the people it wants forgotten. A fortress of steel and concrete. A place without sunlight, without sound, without hope. A place designed not to break men, but to erase them. His cell was a 7 by 12 box. No windows. No open air. No shadows to hide in, no corners to watch. The walls were white, but they felt black. The air was thin. The silence was a punishment in itself. For the first time in his life, Gaspipe Casso wasn't feared. He was contained.
He was caged.
He was nothing but a man alone with the weight of every life he had taken. But Casso wasn't finished.
Not yet.
Inside that concrete tomb, his mind crawled like a wounded animal looking for a way out. He had always survived by outsmarting everyone, friends, enemies, cops, rivals. And now, in the darkest place he had ever been, he tried one final strategy. He flipped. He didn't just talk. He didn't just reveal secrets. He unleashed everything. Names.
Deals.
Murders. Corruption. Entire criminal networks. He didn't just betray the Lucchese family. He dismantled the myths surrounding it. He turned on capos, soldiers, associates, anyone whose downfall could buy him a second chance at life. And he even turned on the very men who had once made him powerful. Luis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa, the Mafia cops. His personal executioners. His shadows with badges. He pulled them into the light. He exposed the unholy alliance that the Mafia and NYPD had quietly whispered about but never dared confirm. He named Joe Massino, the man he once called brother. He named bosses from other families. He named corrupt officials. He named ghosts who had never expected to be dragged into daylight. None were spared. None were safe. In the Mafia's world, there is only one unforgivable crime. Betrayal. Killing a man is business. Extortion is necessary. Fear is a tool. Violence is currency. But betrayal is obliteration. It is the one stain that can never be washed off. And Gaspipe didn't just betray the Mafia, he slaughtered its sacred code. The underworld trembled when they learned he flipped. They whispered his name with disgust and disbelief. Men who once idolized him now spat on the ground at the sound of it. In their eyes, he wasn't just a traitor. He had committed the ultimate Mafia blasphemy. He had betrayed the very system that had given him everything: power, status, money, fear. He had betrayed himself. The FBI thought he would save himself by turning informant.
He didn't.
Casso was too volatile, too arrogant, too dangerous even for the government. He fought with federal agents.
He lied.
He manipulated. He threatened. He broke every rule of witness protection. Eventually, the government realized something chilling. Gaspipe Casso couldn't function without control, without fear, without violence. He was a man built for blood, and blood was forbidden in prison. So the FBI cut him loose. He wasn't useful anymore. He wasn't trustworthy anymore. He was just a monster in a cage, screaming for a world that had finally learned to live without him. Back in his cell, deeper in despair than ever before, Casso had nowhere left to turn. No friends, no allies, no family, no loyalty, and no fear left to wield. He had built an empire with bullets, and it ended with a whisper. He had inspired terror in an entire city, and now he inspired only pity. He had once been untouchable, and now he was forgotten. Anthony Gaspipe Casso, the Mafia's most feared killer, the architect of corruption, the man who made the NYPD dance to his tune, had become its greatest traitor. His fall wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was silent.
Cold. Doomed.
A man drowning in the consequences he spent a lifetime trying to outrun. In the end, fear has a way of coming home. It circles back. It crawls into the cracks of the world it once controlled. It turns like a shadow that finally remembers who cast it. For Anthony Gaspipe, Casso, the man who built an empire on violence and intimidation, fear returned, not as a weapon, but as a sentence.
His own.
Years had passed since Casso commanded armies, ordered murders, or watched the city bow beneath his shadow. Time had eroded the myth. Isolation dissolved the aura. The name Gaspipe, once whispered with trembling reverence, had become something else entirely. A curse. A warning. A ghost. Inside the concrete tomb of prison, he became a man stripped of every illusion. No more soldiers waiting for orders. No more detectives ready to kill for him. No more captains begging for favor. Just silence.
Heavy. Dense.
Unforgiving. A silence no amount of violence could break. For decades he had built his life around the Mafia, its rules, its promises, its blood-stained brotherhood. He believed in its power. He believed in its protection. He believed in its loyalty. But when he broke Omerta, the sacred code, he didn't just cross a line. He severed the last thread that tied him to the world he had dominated. The Lucchese family erased him. His name was spit on. Old allies refused to even acknowledge he ever existed. In Mafia culture, that is a fate worse than death. And Casso felt that death daily. In every empty letter, every silent phone call, every holiday with no visitor, he had once commanded fear.
Now he was consumed by it.
Most informants, even the violent ones, get a second life through protection. New names, new towns, new futures. But not Casso. The government, the same government he fed information to, soon realized something terrifying. Gaspipe Casso was too dangerous to save. He threatened guards. He manipulated inmates. He fought with federal officers. He broke every rule he agreed to follow. He wasn't a man who could hide quietly in a suburb. He was a man who corrupted whatever he touched. So the Witness Protection Program made an unprecedented decision. They rejected him. The man who once controlled parts of New York now had nowhere left to go. Not in the streets, not in the system, not in the shadows. The FBI feared him for years. But respect for his cunning turned into hatred for his treachery. Agents he once tried to manipulate openly despised him. Prosecutors he promised information called him untrustworthy, a liar, a cancer on both sides of the law. He had betrayed them too, fed them lies, twisted the truth, weaponized cooperation. He wasn't an asset. He was a liability. And when the system realized he had nothing left to offer, they pushed him into the deepest corner of the prison network and locked the door. Men he had once elevated now cursed his name. Men he had once protected now prayed for his suffering. Men he had once commanded now hoped he died choking in solitude. To them, he wasn't just a traitor. He was an infection, a reminder of how corruption could rot even the strongest family from the inside. The underworld has long memories. And Casso's name became a story told to young soldiers about what happens when power turns into madness. Casso's influence ran so deep, even in chains, that authorities treated him as if he were still capable of reaching through walls. He was transferred repeatedly, monitored obsessively, kept far from other mobsters to prevent him from spreading chaos. He was a caged animal the system didn't trust, too violent to release, too dangerous to protect, too corrupt to rehabilitate, too infamous to forget. Even behind bars, fear was a shadow. When Casso contracted COVID-19 behind prison walls in 2020, he was moved to a medical facility, alone, isolated, unrecognized by the world he once dominated. There was no vigil, no priest, no final confession, no circle of loyal men waiting for their boss's last breath. He died a prisoner, an outcast, a ghost in government custody. No power, No allies. No family. No loyalty. No empire left to his name. His funeral was not a grand mafia send-off. It was a formality, quiet, clinical, forgotten. A man who once terrified New York was buried with no more ceremony than a number on a file. Anthony Gaspipe Casso didn't leave behind riches. He didn't leave behind honor. He didn't leave behind respect. He left behind fear. A thick, suffocating legacy of terror that lingered in the memory of anyone who crossed his path. His name became a myth not because of glory, but because of brutality. Because of what happens when a man chooses violence over loyalty, paranoia over reason, power over humanity. He became a warning, a symbol of the one truth every criminal eventually learns. Fear can raise you higher than any throne, and it can bury you deeper than any grave. He started as a boy who learned that violence opened doors. He became a man who believed he could rule a city. He became a monster who thought he could outrun consequence. And he died as proof that no empire survives when its foundation is fear. Casso didn't just lose everything. He became the lesson. He became the ghost. He became the echo that still rattles through Mafia history. What happens when fear becomes a man, and that man becomes unstoppable? After witnessing how Gaspipe Casso rose through terror and died in isolation, what do you think? Is fear a path to power or a path to destruction? Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share this video. Click on the screen to watch the next one.